I want to take us back to where we started on Monday. This is the last day of reading John 9, verses 1 through 12. And at the beginning of our plan in John, we told you we were going slow on purpose. That John's text is rich enough that you can go slowly and turn it like a diamond and see the light strike through in different ways. So we've touched on what I'm thinking about today, but I hope to bring this to a new light. I want to focus on the question Jesus' disciples ask him when they see the man born blind. Listen to this in verse 1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples, remember, these are the people who have been following him around, watching him heal, hearing him teach. They ask him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And I know we've talked in our videos about how in the ancient world, sin and suffering were connected. That if you had something wrong with you, it must be because you did something wrong. And my posture, at least for the last week, has been, gosh, how archaic that they would think that. But as I've read this story throughout the week and thought about this, it's clear to me that we do the same thing today. I do the same thing. That when I see someone who's walking through something difficult, whether it's addiction or divorce or some other breakdown in life or a sickness, I try to understand it. Why is this happening? I analyze it. And it's too easy to think about suffering as an idea. Suffering is never just an idea. It's always personal because it always affects a person. And I think what the disciples are doing is trying to understand why this bad thing happened. Because if we could understand why it happened, we could somehow protect ourselves from it happening to us. See, if X, Y, or Z only happens to people who do bad things or who make unwise choices, then somehow we think, well, I could never have that happen to me. Divorce could never happen in my family. I could never struggle with this, which is actually not true. It's one of the ways that we grasp for security and comfort and certainty in a world where suffering is sometimes very random, but always painful. So the question I'm wrestling with today that I want to invite you into is, where has suffering become an idea for you instead of a person? Where has suffering become an idea that you're analyzing and talking about around the dinner table instead of moving in close to experience that suffering alongside of someone or to relieve the suffering with that person? I think we do this with individuals. People who are experiencing pain and problems, we try to rationalize and make sense of it. But I also think that as a communal people, we do this with outside groups. We look at other groups of people who are suffering and try to explain ways that might say they brought this on themselves, or they did this because X, Y, or Z, or this is happening because of something they did wrong, instead of moving in close, building a relationship across those lines of difference, and trying to understand, to feel, and to relieve the suffering of those people who are hurting. Think about any major political issue when we're talking about people. Remember, suffering is not political. Suffering is personal. Jesus rejects the question altogether of who sinned, this man or his parents. And instead, he moves in close. He spits in the dirt and he puts the mud on the man's eyes. You imagine this man could feel Jesus' breath on his face, and the work of God is done. Now, when we move in to be the hands and feet of Jesus with people who are suffering, to sit in their midst, to understand their stories, to join in their fight, we actually get to participate in the work of God. Now, the work of God can still happen if we don't, but think of what's possible when we move in close rather than sitting around at the outskirts judging and making reasons and excuses for why somebody else is hurting. So as you sit with the scripture today, whose suffering have you turned into an idea? Whose suffering have you turned into a voting issue instead of moving in close and building relationship, building bridges? And what would it look like today to move in close? to reject this abstract idea that suffering can somehow be explained, and instead to join in the work of God by loving and showing up and caring for those among us who are in pain.